I let it go too far. That phrase has a specific meaning to me now, not the general sense of something getting out of hand, but the precise, personal meaning of watching a thing progress past a point you identified and named to yourself, and then continuing to watch it progress past that point without intervening. I had a point. I'd set it. I'd said, specifically in my own interior accounting, if it reaches here, I will do something different. And then it reached there, and I did the same thing I'd been doing. That in this case was a financial situation. I'm going to be specific about it because I think the specificity is instructive, and because the shame around financial difficulty often prevents people from talking about it in ways that might actually be useful. I had been spending beyond my means for about 3 years. Not catastrophically, not the kind of overspending that produces immediate crisis. The manageable kind. The kind where you can maintain the surface by moving things around, by telling yourself the situation is temporary, by treating debt as a present cost with a future solution. The future solution was always the next pay increase, the next project, the next thing that would change the fundamental balance of the situation. And the next thing always arrived and the balance didn't fundamentally change, because the spending had quietly calibrated itself to the income in a way that left the same gap regardless of what either was. I noticed this. I calculated it, specifically. I identified the gap. I said to myself, if the gap is still this size in 6 months, I will make different choices. Different specific choices, cutting specific things, adjusting specific behaviors. 6 months later the gap was the same size. I did not make different choices. I recalibrated the deadline. Said, if it's still this way in 6 more months. This repeated, with variations in the specific deadline and the specific threshold, for about 2 years. I was not unaware. I was very aware. I had the spreadsheet, I understood the numbers, I knew exactly what was happening. What I was doing was maintaining awareness as a substitute for action. Looking at the problem in enough detail to feel that I was engaging with it, without actually making the changes that would have addressed it. There's a word in behavioral economics for this: structured procrastination. The elaborate management of the relationship to a problem as a way of not solving it. The performance of engagement that produces no output. I was performing engagement with my financial situation very thoroughly, in spreadsheets, in recalculated projections, in deadline setting. I was not solving it. The thing that finally broke the cycle was not insight. I had plenty of insight. It was a specific event, a bill I could not move around. Not dramatic. Not a crisis. Just a specific, concrete bill that was not payable on the terms I'd been maintaining, which required me to make a real decision rather than a deferred one. The decision I made was simple and practical. I sold something I valued and I restructured, and then I actually changed the spending behaviors that had been producing the gap. Not complicated. Not requiring extraordinary willpower. Just requiring the acknowledgement that the deadline I kept moving was not a real deadline if I kept moving it. What I understand now is the specific function of the moving deadline. It preserved the sense of being in control of a situation that I was not actually managing. By keeping the threshold just ahead, by always being the person who will address this when it reaches X, I maintained the identity of someone who was aware and intentional about their finances, even while the finances were not being managed intentionally. Identity preservation is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It can sustain behaviors for years that nothing else would sustain, because the behavior isn't just serving a practical function, it's maintaining a story you tell yourself about who you are. I was the person who was aware of the problem and was going to address it. That person didn't have to address it today. They just had to have the threshold. Moving the threshold preserved the identity. And the identity preservation cost, in aggregate, more than the problem would have cost to actually solve 2 years earlier. I don't set deadlines for myself anymore without a specific commitment to what happens when the deadline arrives. Not a new deadline. an action. A specific, irreversible action. That specificity is the difference between a real deadline and a moving one. And the difference between those two things is the difference between addressing something and managing your relationship to addressing it indefinitely. I let it go too far. I know exactly how far is too far now. And I move before I get there. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively, but without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.